Ryan Smith rose before the sun, as he always did. His modest home, nestled in their humble neighborhood, was still blanketed in the quiet of pre-dawn. He padded to the kitchen, the rich aroma of brewing coffee filling the air as he mentally walked through his day's work. Arriving at the sprawling estate where he was employed, Ryan began tending to the gardens with an ingrained meticulousness. His hands, calloused yet deft, pruned and shaped each bush and coaxed every bloom, his dedication a mirror of his own tireless spirit. His employer, a wealthy businessman, acknowledged Ryan with a curt nod. Ryan responded with respect, grateful for the stability the job provided his family. That evening, returning home after a long day, Ryan was greeted by the warmth of Grace Gonzalez, his wife and partner in life. Grace, her heart as gentle as her touch, embraced him. "How was your day, my love?" she asked, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and love. "Good, as always. The garden is looking beautiful," Ryan replied, relishing this small island of peace in their busy lives. Grace smiled, relief washing over her face. The family gathered for dinner. Camilla, their eldest at 25, spoke animatedly about her work. "I closed a major deal today," she announced, her voice ringing with pride. Peter, 22, chimed in, discussing his university studies with a quiet dedication that spoke volumes. But 18-year-old Santiago remained silent, his gaze distant. Unlike his siblings, Santiago seemed burdened by their circumstances. He sighed, pushing food around his plate, his attention far from the lively family banter. "Dad, please, don't worry so much about expenses," Camila said, breaking into Santiago's silence. "Peter and I are doing well." Ryan smiled, pride swelling in his chest for his eldest children. "Thank you, mija. I appreciate everything you both do, but I will always worry about my children." Santiago's gaze flicked to his family, but he remained silent. His mind was miles away, yearning for a different life. He envied the effortless luxury of his classmates, craving things his family could never provide. After dinner, Ryan approached Santiago. "Son, is everything all right? You seem distant." Santiago shrugged, his voice flat. "I'm fine, just thinking." Ryan sighed, the invisible chasm between him and his youngest son widening. As Grace cleared the dinner dishes, she shot Ryan a concerned look. "Santiago is going through a phase, mi amor. Give him time," she whispered. "I know," Ryan replied, his voice heavy with a father's concern and enduring hope. "I just want what's best for him." Night settled over their home, draping it in silence. Ryan lay awake, Grace's words echoing in his mind. He knew patience was needed, but worry for Santiago gnawed at him. Their relationship was a complicated dance. Juan, a man of simple values, strived to instill in his sons the importance of hard work and gratitude. Santiago, however, wrestled with his insecurities, his desires tangled with the allure of material possessions. It felt as though an insurmountable gap lay between their worlds. Camilla and Peter were unwavering pillars of support, but Santiago remained an enigma Ryan couldn't quite decipher. Time, he knew, would march on, forcing each of them to forge their own path and face life's trials with courage. Ryan could only hope that someday Santiago would understand the true meaning of wealth and the enduring strength of family. At school, Santiago moved through the crowded hallways like a ghost. He observed his classmates, their designer backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders, the glint of expensive smartphones in their hands. Each conversation he overheard, each casual mention of lavish vacations and cars, gifted with a nonchalance he couldn't fathom, was another blow to his already bruised spirit. He couldn't focus in class, his mind a whirlwind of yearning for a life out of reach. Leaving school, he joined his usual group of friends, their excited chatter about the new mall they'd visited over the weekend washing over him. "Check out these new kicks, man. What do you think?" one of them asked, propping a foot up to showcase a pair of pricey sneakers. Santiago forced a smile, the lie catching in his throat. "Yeah, those are cool," he mumbled. The atmosphere at home couldn't have been more different. Dinner was ready, the table set as his family settled into their familiar routine. Camilla and Peter chatted about their day, but their words barely registered in Santiago's mind. He was back in the school corridors, surrounded by the things he could only dream of possessing. "Dad," Santiago suddenly blurted, interrupting the flow of conversation. "Why can't we have things like everyone else? I'm sick of always having to explain why we can't afford anything." Silence descended upon the table, thick and heavy. Ryan met his youngest son's gaze, his expression serious but not unkind. "Santiago, you know we do our best to make sure you have everything you need." "It's not just about necessities," Santiago shot back, his voice rising in frustration. "I want more. I want what they have. I'm tired of being the poor kid." Peter looked at his younger brother with concern. "Hey, it's not all about the money. There are more important things. Family, hard work." "Easy for you to say," Santiago retorted, his voice laced with bitterness. "You're practically finished with college. I'm stuck here, and I don't want to live like this." Camila tried to interject, her voice gentle. "Santiago, we're all in this together. We all work hard to get ahead." Santiago snorted, pushing himself away from the table, leaving his dinner untouched. "You don't understand," he muttered before storming out of the house, the slamming door punctuating his frustration. Ryan sighed, feeling the weight of his son's unhappiness. He knew he had to do something, but what? He got up from the table and went looking for Santiago. He found him on the porch, staring out at the street, his expression a mixture of sadness and anger. "Santiago," Ryan started, taking a seat next to him. "I understand you're frustrated, but money doesn't buy happiness. Life isn't about accumulating things." Santiago wouldn't look at him. "Then what's the point? Working like a dog your whole life and having nothing to show for it?" Ryan put a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's about hard work, honesty, and appreciating what you do have. I've worked hard to give you a decent life, and I hope you'll see that one day." Santiago finally turned, his eyes welling up. "I don't want to be poor my whole life, Papa. I don't want people to feel sorry for me." That night, Santiago went to bed, his heart heavy with unfulfilled desires, his mind a storm of uncertainty. Juan, too, went to bed troubled, his thoughts consumed by his son's unhappiness. He clung to the hope that Santiago would find his own path to contentment, even if it took time. Ryan arrived at work early, as usual. As he organized his tools in the shed, his boss, Mr. Fernandez, approached with an uncharacteristically friendly smile. "Juan, I need a favor today," Mr. Fernandez began, holding out a set of keys. They were attached to a sleek, luxurious car Ryan had only ever admired from afar. "I need you to run to the building supply store. You can take the family car." Ryan took the keys, his calloused fingers brushing against the cool metal. "Of course, Mr. Fernandez. It will be an honor." The car gleamed under the early morning sun, its leather interior smelling expensive and new. As Ryan slid behind the wheel, a nervous excitement bubbled in his chest. It wasn't every day he got to experience such luxury, and he couldn't help but imagine the look on Santiago's face when he saw the car. Returning home, he found Santiago getting ready for school. "Hey, son, I'm driving you this morning," he said, casually holding up the keys. Santiago's jaw dropped as he spotted the luxury car parked in their driveway. "Seriously, Dad? Whoa, I never thought I'd see you driving something like this." Warmth spread through Juan's chest at his son's genuine excitement. "It's a special occasion. Come on, we don't want to be late." During the drive, Santiago was enthralled, his fingers trailing over the leather seats, his eyes drinking in every detail. "This car is amazing, Dad. My friends won't believe this." Ryan smiled, a sliver of hope blooming in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this small act would bridge the gap that had grown between them. "I'm glad you like it. I wanted you to see that even though we may not have a lot, we can still enjoy good things sometimes." As they approached the school, Ryan noticed a change in Santiago. His initial enthusiasm evaporated, replaced by a fidgety discomfort. He started looking around nervously. "Santiago, everything okay?" Ryan asked, concern creeping into his voice. "Yeah, Dad. It's just... Could you drop me off at the corner? Don't pull up right in front," Santiago replied, his voice strained. A sliver of worry pierced through Juan's newfound hope, but he did as his son requested. As he pulled up to the corner and Santiago quickly hopped out of the car, one of his friends walked by. "Yo, Santiago, is that your ride?" he called out, eyes wide with disbelief. Santiago hesitated, then replied without meeting his father's gaze. "Nah, it's just my family's chauffeur doing us a favor." The world seemed to stop for Juan. The word chauffeur echoed in the air, each syllable a tiny dagger to his heart. He watched as his son walked away, swallowed by his group of friends, their laughter and carefree banter a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Juan. Heart heavy, Ryan pulled away from the curb. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. Confusion and sadness warred within him. How could his own son be ashamed of him? Back at the estate, Ryan mechanically went about the task Mr. Fernandez had given him, his mind replaying the scene in front of the school. Every movement, every chore felt heavy, as if a part of him had been left behind on that street corner, watching his son deny him. That evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Ryan could barely look at Santiago without the sting of his son's betrayal resurfacing. Dinner was a somber affair, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware against plates. Finally, Grace, ever perceptive, broke the tension. "Juan, is everything all right? You seem distant." Juan's gaze shifted to Santiago, his voice quiet but heavy with disappointment. "I drove Santiago to school in Mr. Fernandez's car this morning. When his friends saw him, he told them I was the family chauffeur." Santiago's fork clattered to his plate, the sound amplified in the small kitchen. "Dad, it's not like that. I didn't want them to think we were—" he stammered, unable to finish the sentence. Ryan took a deep, steadying breath, struggling to maintain his composure. "This isn't about apologies, Santiago. I need to understand why you felt the need to lie about our family." "It's complicated, okay?" Santiago retorted, his voice tight with a defensive edge. "It's hard, seeing my friends with everything and feeling like we're always struggling. I just want to fit in for once, not feel different." "I understand wanting to fit in," Ryan said, nodding slowly. "But what hurts is that you think the solution is to be ashamed of who we are." Santiago's gaze flickered up, his eyes reflecting a mixture of defiance and confusion. "I'm not ashamed of you, Papa. I don't want them to think we're poor." "And what if we are?" Ryan countered, his voice gaining strength. "There's no shame in being humble, in working hard. What matters is how we carry ourselves." with dignity, with respect. Santiago shifted uncomfortably. That's easy to say, but it's different when you're living it. I know, Ryan said, his voice softening. I've lived my whole life working hard to give you kids the best I can. It's not easy, but I've always tried to teach you to be grateful for what you do have, not to place value on things you don't. Santiago looked down, his arms still crossed defensively. It's just that sometimes I feel like I'll never have the things I want. Material things will never fulfill you, Santiago, Ryan said, sadness tinging his words. True peace, true happiness, that comes from within. I need you to understand that. Not for me, but for yourself. Santiago remained silent, his eyes downcast, a whirlwind of emotions brewing beneath the surface. I'm trying, Papa. It's just hard. Ryan nodded, a mixture of sadness and hope warring within him. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, always. I love you, mijo, and I want what's best for you. But you need to learn to recognize what's truly important in this life. Santiago finally met his father's gaze. For the first time, he saw the hurt and disappointment lurking beneath the surface of his father's stoicism, but more than that, he saw the unwavering love in his eyes. Something shifted within him. I know, Papa. I'll try to do better. A small, weary smile touched Juan's lips. That's all I ask. Just try. He got up from the table and walked over to Santiago, placing a hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this, together. But we need to be a team, a family. Santiago nodded, a sliver of understanding finally cutting through the anger and shame. Thanks, Dad. Ryan pulled him into a brief embrace, then stepped back, giving his son space to process the conversation. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a sliver of hope. As Santiago sat at the table, lost in thought, Ryan joined Grace in the living room. She looked up at him, her gaze full of understanding, and took his hand. How are you feeling? She asked, quietly. Hopeful, he replied, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. It's a start. And for the first time that evening, the small house, despite the challenges they faced, felt a little warmer, a little more whole. The Smith family, battered but not broken, faced their uncertain future together. Later that night, Ryan was in the living room, running through the next day's mental checklist when the phone rang. He frowned, surprised by the late hour, and picked up the receiver. Hello? Good evening, Mr. Smith, a man's voice said, firm yet kind. This is Dr. Salazar. I apologize for the late hour, but I'm calling with some important news regarding your Uncle Roberto. Ryan froze, the weight of his uncle's name settling heavily in the silence. What happened, Doctor? Your Uncle Roberto has passed away, the lawyer's voice, a calm baritone across the line, confirmed, and he's left his entire estate to you. The news hit Ryan like a physical blow. His entire estate? Yes, Mr. Smith, Dr. Salazar confirmed. He was a very private man, but he had accumulated considerable wealth. We need to discuss the details at my office tomorrow. Ryan hung up slowly, his mind a jumble of thoughts. Grace, who had been watching him from the kitchen doorway, came over and sat beside him. Juan, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. My Uncle Roberto. He's dead, Ryan said, his voice hollow. And he's left everything to me. Grace's eyebrows shot up, her surprise quickly followed by a quiet understanding. That's unexpected. How do you feel? I don't know, Ryan admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. Sadness for his passing, of course, but mostly confusion. I don't know what this means for us. Grace took his hand, her touch a comforting anchor. "We'll figure it out. Together." The next day, Ryan sat in Dr. Salazar's office, the plush furniture and walls lined with law books, feeling strangely at odds with his worn work boots and calloused hands. The lawyer greeted him with a professional smile, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Mr. Smith," Dr. Salazar began, placing a thick file on the table. "Your Uncle Roberto has left behind a sizable estate, money, property, and other assets. This is his will and the related documents." Ryan nodded, still struggling to grasp the magnitude of the situation. I had no idea he had so much." "He was a very private man," the lawyer agreed, opening the file and pointing to various pages. "Everything is detailed here. We'll need your signature on some paperwork to initiate the transfer process." Ryan signed where instructed, each stroke of the pen feeling surreal. When it was done, Dr. Salazar shook his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Smith. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me." Back home, Ryan sat at the kitchen table, the legal documents spread out before him. Grace sat beside him, her presence a calming force in the storm of his thoughts. "It's more money than we ever dreamed of," he said, his voice hushed. "It's a big responsibility," Grace agreed, her tone gentle but firm. "But it's also a huge opportunity. What are you thinking, Juan?" Ryan looked down at the documents, his mind awash in possibilities. "We could pay off all our debts, ensure the kids have their education taken care of. Maybe even live a little more comfortably. But," he paused, shaking his head, "I don't want this to change us, Grace. I don't want us to forget who we are, where we came from." Grace smiled, her eyes filled with pride and love. "That's what I love about you, Juan. And Santiago," Ryan continued, his thoughts crystallizing. "I need him to understand this. I need all of them. Camila, Peter too, to see this not as a chance to become complacent, but as an opportunity to grow." Later that evening, golden sunlight streamed through the living room window as Ryan paced, his mind awhirl with the weight of the news he had to share. Finally, he stopped, taking a deep breath. It was time. "Camila, Peter, Santiago," he called out, his voice firm yet calm. "Come to the living room, please. I have something important to tell you all." His 3 children gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The air crackled with anticipation, each of them sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Ryan drew in a breath. "This afternoon, I received some unexpected news. My Uncle Roberto, he passed away." He paused, letting the news settle. "And he's left his entire inheritance to us." Camilla and Peter exchanged surprised glances, their eyes widening as a slow wave of relief, of dawning hope, spread across their faces. "Papa, that's incredible," Peter breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "It could be life-changing," Camilla added, a shaky but relieved smile touching her lips. Santiago, however, frowned, his eyes flickering with a calculating glint. "What about me? How much do I get?" he asked, his voice laced with a greedy edge that sent a chill down Juan's spine. Juan's face hardened, his gaze locking with Santiago's. "Before we talk about how this inheritance will be divided, there's something you need to understand." Santiago crossed his arms defensively. "What's there to understand?" Ryan sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Camilla and Peter. They've shown me, and this family, nothing but respect and support. You, on the other hand," he paused, his disappointment in his youngest son, a tangible weight in the room. "Your behavior, especially these past few months, has been disrespectful and inconsiderate." Santiago started to protest, but Ryan held upper hand. "I've made a decision. The inheritance, it will be for Camilla and Peter. You, Santiago, will not receive any of it." The silence that followed was deafening, thick with shock and burgeoning anger. Santiago's face paled, his expression morphing from disbelief to fury. "What? That's not fair. I'm your son too." "You are," Ryan stated, his voice unwavering. "And it's precisely because you are my son that I need you to learn something. Money can't buy respect. It can't buy family values." Santiago shot out of his chair, his eyes blazing. "This is insane. You can't do this." Ryan remained calm, despite the storm of emotions raging within him. "I can, and I have. Until you learn to value your family, until you show us the respect we deserve, you will not receive a single cent." Camilla and Peter, though stunned by their father's decision, looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and understanding. "Thank you, Papa," Camilla said softly, "for trusting us." Peter nodded. "We won't let you down." Santiago, however, couldn't contain his rage. "This isn't over," he shouted before storming out of the room, leaving the weight of his anger hanging heavy in the air. "It is," he mumbled into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted it to end like this. I wanted to teach him a lesson, make him see what's truly important." "He'll see it one day," Graciela said, her voice soothing. "Just give him time. We'll get through this together, like we always do." As they walked towards the car, Ryan clung to Graciela's words like a lifeline, but a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in their family. He had stood his ground, defended his principles, but at what cost? Life at home continued, but the absence of Santiago's presence was a constant reminder of the raw wound this inheritance had carved through their family. Each day, Ryan hoped, prayed that Santiago would call, that he'd come home ready to talk, to heal. The lawyer, a man with a carefully neutral expression and steel-gray hair, listened intently as Santiago laid out his case. "I want to contest my father's decision about the inheritance," Santiago said, frustration lacing his every word. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Tell me about your situation." He pulled out a notepad, his pen poised. Santiago told him everything, from his uncle Roberto's death to the unequal distribution of the inheritance. "It's not right. My siblings get everything, and I get nothing. We should all inherit equally." The lawyer nodded, acknowledging Santiago's anger. "I understand your position. We can certainly pursue a case for equitable distribution. But be aware," he cautioned. "These matters can be complex, drawn out, and emotionally draining." "I don't care," Santiago said, his voice tight with resentment. "I want what's rightfully mine." Weeks later, the Smith family found themselves in a sterile courtroom, the air thick with tension. Santiago sat beside his lawyer, his face carefully blank, as Ryan and his attorney, a man whose calm, assured demeanor stood in stark contrast to the turmoil swirling around them, sat opposite. The judge entered, and everyone rose. "You may be seated," the judge said, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom. "Let's hear the arguments." Santiago's lawyer went first, outlining the case for equal inheritance and painting Juan's decision as arbitrary and unfair. Juan's lawyer countered, skillfully explaining the reasoning behind Juan's decision. "Your Honor," he argued, "my client, Ryan Smith, made his decision based on his deeply held family values and the demonstrated character of his children. He rewarded the children who'd shown him unwavering support and respect. His decision was not made lightly, nor is it without merit." The tension in the room ratcheted up as both sides presented their arguments. Juan's gaze met Santiago's across the divide, his heart aching for the chasm that had grown between them. Finally, the judge spoke. "I've heard the arguments from both sides. While I understand the plaintiff's desire for an equal share, it's clear that Ryan Smith's decision regarding the inheritance was based on values that cannot be easily quantified in a court of law. I see no legal fault in his decision and therefore rule in favor of Ryan Smith." Santiago's face contorted with anger. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is bullshit!" he shouted, before storming out of the courtroom, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Ryan watched his son go, a heavy weight settling in his chest. He might have won the legal battle, but he knew he'd lost something far more precious: his son's trust, his respect. After the court proceedings, Ryan lingered in the hallway outside the courtroom, the weight of his victory heavy on his shoulders. His lawyer clapped a hand on his shoulder, but Ryan barely registered it. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all centered on Santiago. What had he done? How could he ever hope to repair the damage this rift had caused? Grace was waiting for him when he stepped outside. She took one look at his face, her own expression a mixture of concern and sympathy, and pulled him into a hug. "I'm so sorry, Juan. It's a lot to process." "It is," he mumbled into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted it to end like this. I wanted to teach him a lesson, make him see what's truly important." "He'll see it one day," Grace said, her voice soothing. "Just give him time. We'll get through this together, like we always do." As they walked towards the car, Ryan clung to Grace's words like a lifeline, but a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in their family. He had stood his ground, defended his principles, but at what cost? Life at home continued, but the absence of Santiago's presence was a constant reminder of the raw wound this inheritance had carved through their family. Each day, Ryan hoped, prayed, that Santiago would call, that he'd come home ready to talk, to heal. Weeks turned into months. Life went on, but the void remained. Ryan buried himself in his work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of nature, the feel of cool earth against his calloused hands. One chilly morning, Santiago woke in his small, sparsely furnished apartment, the grey light of dawn filtering through the window. Life on his own, he quickly realized, was much harder than he'd anticipated. Every day was a struggle to make ends meet, to keep his tiny space from devolving into chaos, all while juggling his studies and part-time job. He stood in his cramped kitchen, wrestling with a leaky faucet, frustration mounting. Finally, he threw the wrench down, sinking to the floor, a wave of despair washing over him. He thought of how effortlessly his father always seemed to handle these small household repairs, how little he'd appreciated those seemingly simple tasks. Later that week, as he sat hunched over his bank statements, the numbers blurring before his tired eyes, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He was broke, barely scraping by. He remembered all the times Ryan had worked overtime, his face etched with fatigue, to ensure they had food on the table, a roof over their heads. Shame, hot and thick, coiled in his gut. His anger, his sense of injustice, morphed into something resembling understanding. For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the sacrifices his father had made, the weight he had carried for so long. One evening, over cheap takeout with a group of friends, Santiago finally broke. "I've been such an idiot," he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I took my dad for granted, never stopped to consider everything he did for us. I was so focused on what we didn't have that I completely overlooked everything we did." His friends listened, their expressions a mixture of concern and understanding. "It's a big step, admitting that," one of them said. "Yeah," another chimed in. "We all screw up. It's what you do next that matters." Their words spurred him on. He started small, sending quick texts to Camilla and Peter, then working his way up to phone calls. The conversations were awkward at first, filled with long silences and strained laughter, but slowly they began to feel more natural. "Peter," he said one afternoon, his voice trembling slightly, but resolute. I wanted to apologize for everything. I know I messed up, caused a lot of pain." On the other end of the line, Peter, caught off guard by his younger brother's unexpected apology, was quiet for a moment. It's good to hear from you, Santiago. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you're trying to make things right." The call to his father, however, was the hardest. He picked up the phone countless times, only to hang up, the weight of what he'd done, the words he needed to say, choking him. Finally, one evening, he forced himself to hit the call button. The familiar sound of his father's voice on the other end of the line sent a jolt of nervous anticipation through him. "Dad, it's Santiago." He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. I wanted to talk to you, to apologize." The silence stretched, agonizingly thin, before Ryan spoke. "Santiago, I'm glad you called. I'm here. I've always been here." Those simple words, spoken with such quiet strength, broke through the wall Santiago had built around his heart. "I've been unfair to you, Dad. I didn't appreciate everything you did for us. I want to change that." "What matters, Santiago, is that you're willing to try," Ryan replied, a hopeful note creeping into his voice. "I want you to know you'll always have a place in this family." Overcome with emotion, Santiago could only manage a choked, "Thank you, Dad. I want to prove it to you." Juan, his own heart full, cleared his throat. "How about you come over for dinner next week? We'll have a family dinner. Just us." The Smith house buzzed with an unusual level of activity as Ryan and Grace bustled around the kitchen, preparing for their family dinner. A nervous energy crackled in the air, their movements synchronized from years of unspoken understanding. "Do you think this will be all right?" Grace asked, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged plates on the table. Juan, pulling the roast out of the oven to check its progress, nodded slowly. "I'm hopeful. Santiago, he's changing, Grace. We just need to give him a chance. Give him time." Grace smiled, though a hint of worry lingered in her eyes. I know. I can't help but worry." Ryan reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It will be fine. We're strong, Grace. We're a family." As the appointed hour approached, the house crackled with anticipation. Camilla and Peter arrived first, offering their help with last-minute preparations. The looks they exchanged with their parents spoke volumes. Support, a shared hope, tinged with apprehension. Then the sound of footsteps on the porch, hesitant yet resolute. Santiago stood awkwardly at the door, his shoulders slumped, his expression a mixture of nervousness and regret. He held a bakery box, a peace offering. "Hi, everyone," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "Santiago," Ryan said, his own voice thick with emotion. Come in. We've been waiting for you." Santiago stepped inside, stopping in the middle of the living room, the weight of his family's gazes heavy on him. He took a deep breath, meeting their eyes one by one. "I want to apologize," he began, his voice catching slightly. "I've done a lot of thinking lately about my actions, and I realize how much I hurt you all." Peter nodded. We're willing to move forward, Santiago, but only if you're truly sorry. Santiago looked at his brother, gratitude flickering in his eyes. I am, and I want to show you. I'm here to rebuild what I've broken. If you'll let me. Juan, who had been silently observing his son, stepped forward, placing a hand on Santiago's shoulder. You're our son, Santiago. You'll always be a part of this family. All I ever wanted was for you to understand, truly understand, the value of hard work, of honesty, of respect. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I believe you do now. Tears welled up in Santiago's eyes. Thanks, Dad. Thanks for not giving up on me. Grace, wiping away a stray tear, joined them, pulling Santiago into a warm embrace. It's so good to have you back. The tension that had held them captive for months seemed to dissipate as they gathered around the table. Dinner was a quiet affair at first, punctuated by hesitant laughter and tentative conversations. But slowly, as the food was passed and memories were shared, a sense of normalcy, of genuine warmth, returned to the Smith household. Ryan observed his family, his heart swelling with a gratitude he couldn't quite articulate. Every smile, every shared laugh was a balm to his soul. He felt a deep sense of peace settle over him as he witnessed the invisible threads of their family slowly being woven back together. After dinner, they moved to the living room, enjoying a rare evening of quiet togetherness. Santiago sat next to Juan, watching his father with a newfound appreciation. Dad, he said, his voice earnest, I promise I'll work hard to earn back your trust, to be a son you can be proud of. Ryan smiled, placing a hand on Santiago's shoulder. I know you will, son, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Grace brought in a tray of coffee and pastries, and they lingered in the warm glow of the living room, a sense of hope and unity settling over them. Camilla and Peter talked about their plans for the future, and Santiago, his voice tinged with a newfound humility, shared his own aspirations. As the night deepened and lights flickered on in houses up and down the street, a sense of renewal permeated the Smith household. The challenges they had faced, the heartache they had endured, seemed smaller, less insurmountable, in the face of their rediscovered bond. Ryan leaned back, watching his family, his heart full. They had stumbled, they had fallen, but they had found their way back to each other. And that, he knew, was the greatest inheritance of all. This story reminds us that while life is full of challenges, there is always hope for those who persevere with faith and determination. Remember, as this tale has shown us, God always blesses good people. Everything happens for a reason, and even when we don't understand the why of our struggles, we must trust that happiness will come if we keep our faith and move forward. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel so you can receive notifications of more inspiring and moving stories that are sure to touch your heart. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.